Good afternoon, and today we're pleased to have Barb Morneau with us. Now, Barb's family name, or the name before she was married, was Guillette, and her family has a very long legacy at St. Joe's. So Barb, we're very fortunate to have today, who's going to tell us a bit about her experiences and her family's experiences at St. Joe's. So Barb, to start off with, can you tell us a bit about the Guillette legacy?
Yes, thanks for asking me here, by the way, Terry.
Yeah.
I don't know what information I have is all that relevant, but my grandfather came from Ottawa, Quebec, was sent to Ottawa University, which was Ottawa College at that time, for his education. He was 13, didn't speak a word of English, I understand. He was an amazing athlete. He was apparently, Canon Prudhomme said, he was the cleanest, finest athlete in the city, and they went on. He was even, La Dewa had a big article about it. But anyways, to make a long story short, he met his little Irish Colleen, my grandmother, Adelaide Louise Murphy. They married, and she was 19, he was 22. They had 10 children, 5 boys and 5 girls. Now, I don't have access, I didn't have access to, of course, to church records. So I don't know if there was any, if you were at the parish at that time. I know he did go to, he was married at Ottawa University, Chapel. So I went back to the census, and all I could find was that in 1903, I think it is that he lived on Nelson Street. Not the home he built on Nelson. This was where he brought his family. Then he built his home to house his growing family. 363 Nelson, which they lived there until he died. He died in 39, I think, and Mom and Granny in 43. So all those years, the children, all the Guillette children, were parishioners here at the parish. And then even when they grew up and left the nest, 5 of them came back in Sandy Hill. So that their children, and they all had, most of them had large families, so that there was a lot of Guillettes around Sandy Hill, a lot of Guillettes at this church, I'm sure.
And your grandfather's name was Modeste?
Modeste Guillette, I don't know, there's some funny middle name, but my dad is also Modeste Guillette, not to be confused, senior and junior, yeah, right, yeah. So, however, so they were here, like, starting that I know of in 1903 until both of them died.
Cool.
Yeah, and 39 and I think 43.
And one of your grandfather was a football player as
Oh,
well?
he was amazing. He was an amazing football player. Apparently, it was Ottawa University beat. There were in 80 to 85. There was the rugby championships in Ottawa. In 1887, they beat it was the Dominion Championship.
Yes.
They beat McGill, and so yeah, he was really a well-known, famous, apparently, hockey player. So anyhow.
So Barb, what are some of the milestones in your personal journey at St. Joe's?
Well, can I go back a bit?
Oh, certainly.
I was born in 1931.
Okay.
This is the year this church was built, the new church, I guess. I think
Yes.
I read it right. And that was the year that the Montreal Canadiens won the Stanley Cup, by the way. Good year, a good year. But I was only 3. So I was 3, and I stayed at the church, belonged to the church till I was married when I was 21. So it was a fair number of years. But at that time, it was not a great time to be around because it was a Great Depression. I think it was 1940, 29 to 41. There was World War II. And I can remember we did a lot of praying during World War II. I remember novenas, and I had a brother who was overseas, did 33 missions over Germany as a rear air gunner, at 18. So there was a lot of talks back and forth with priests and coming here for rosaries and so on,
Yeah.
So it was, and then of course the Depression as well. I didn't suffer. I was a happy-go-lucky child. My parents had a hard time, I would imagine, but so that was sort of the 30s and 40s, the time that I was brought up here, at St. Joe's in Sandy Hill. And of course, Sandy Hill then was a great place to come from. You know, we had the university, we had St. Joseph's Church, Sacred Heart Church, we had All Saints, the Prime Minister Mackenzie, William Vaughan Mackenzie lived on Laurier Street, and I used to pass Laurier House every day going to school. You know, once in a while we'd see him, and we'd see the RCMP guys giving us out apples at Halloween. But you know, it was just I can still hear the clanging of the streetcars going down Laurier Avenue. You know, beside the church and around. But anyway, so it was a great place to live and come. You know, I enjoyed my life in Sandy Hill. We were close to downtown, all the stores, Ogilvy's, Murphy's, all these stores, the Parliament buildings, and so on. So it was a lively place.
I remember one story I read in the newspaper back then, Barb, where the women of St. Joseph's put together packages of chewing tobacco and sent it to their overseas.
Isn't that something? Isn't that? I can remember my mother saying, not that, but packages over to Jerry, you know. But going back to my journey, I said I was, my family, Modestia, and my older brothers, Gord and Des and Audrey, and myself, Jerry wasn't born then, moved to Sandy Hill, and of course we're parishioners of St. Joe's. And I was only 3. But I mean, I went, of course, the regular milestones that most people you know, have as a youngster: our first communion, our confirmation, our penance, funerals. We'd see relatives' funerals, and even my wedding at this point in time. So there was a lot of activity. My brothers were altar boys. Dad was an usher, and both mom and dad were involved in any of the League of the Sacred Heart or different ones in the church at that time. And even, I must say, going back to my grandfather for a minute, in his obituary, they even had under diocesan, like what he did for the church. Like what leagues, the League of the Sacred Heart and something but St. Francis. So yes. Amazing. That was in the paper. But anyways, going back to me, it was a happy childhood time in St. Joe's and Sandy Hill. I mean, everything went well. I was in the school choir with Audrey, but I think the most memorable time for me was the CYO. Now I should, you know, I really think, like, that Father Conlon, what a lovely, beautiful man he was, you know. And I found that when I was a teenager, like, that was where I socialized. There was no internet, no social media, no dating apps type thing, you know. We came to the church, and we not only did we had skating parties, hay rides, picnics, communion breakfasts, and I can remember the best of all was the plays, like the Riot in Rio that the St. Joe CYO put on. Jack, my husband, had one word to say. He was the father of the heroine, Gord. He, being the artist in the family, he did all the backdrops. Des did the Mexican hat dance with Barbara Glover, and Audrey was in the chorus. So it was fun, you know. And then later on, they put on I think it was the Song of Bernadette, and I was Bernadette's mother. That's how, yeah. So that was it. Was I really credit the CYO for my social development. Mm-hmm. You know, it was amazing. Like, there was wonderful people. Father Conlon had everything so well organized, and volunteers, and there was so much for us to do. And even one of the dances at the Red Brick Hall, who was it? It was Helen Mackey and Mary Auger, who brought in this young man who was playing for the Isle Rough Riders. He was from Windsor, Jack Morneau, and they brought him over to Father Conlon. And of course, Father Conlon introduced Jack to me, and like 2 years later, 69 years, this end of this month, I walked down the hall, and we've been married that long. So it was, yeah. And even Father Conlon, I remember, I was expecting my first child, and he pointed me. It was at a service here. I'm coming over to baptize that child. You know, he was a basic guy. So yeah, it was. It meant a lot to our family and to young people that I knew in the area, that we had a place to come to like St. Joseph's, the CYO. No.
And were you ever involved in the choirs?
Oh, well, I was in the girls' choir. And of course, you know, I directed the choir. Though I didn't know I had to have any background in music at St. Joseph's choir. Yeah, I was in the girls' choir, and that was fun. Sister Benedict and Sister, who was the other one? I think they're very strict, very didn't move a muscle up in the altar here. But yeah, what else was I involved in it seemed I was here a lot at the church, you know, probably a lot of masses and that sort of thing too.
And you also became a teacher at St. Joe's.
At 18 I was teaching, and I became a teacher at St. Joe's. The first 2 years of my teaching career were at St. Joseph's. I can still remember me walking down Laurier Street like the Pied Piper with all these little guys behind me type of thing. And I was sort of living through them, what I had gone through a few years before. And
was that the St. Joe's Girls' School?
Both. I was at both, yeah. And Miss Burke, that was the principal. She was very strict. But nice lady though. But yeah, so it was when I got married in '53 that actually I no longer was a parishioner here at the church.
Yeah.
We moved to Hull, and then we were in London. So, but I always kept in touch with what was going on here, you know. And of course, my brother Jerry was 6 years younger than I am. So when I was a new young married woman, he was an novitiate, Holy Rosary, and Arm Prior. Jerry was was confirmed here and baptized, and as well as being ordained, was 11 other oblates. I don't know whether they were all from here. I know Joe Devlin, Billy Thompson. Billy went to Peru, being a missionary, the Ellsbury missionaries, and Joe, I'm not sure. Of course, Jerry was sent out west. He worked with the native people his whole career, the 20 years, not more than 20 years that he was out there. He just passed away 3 years ago. Mm-hmm. So, so Jerry's, when he had any special occasions, we came back to Ottawa, came back to St. Joseph's Church. We had his 25th anniversary here. Remember that very clearly. It was a day like this, so hot the balloons were bursting. And when he died, I didn't know whether to have his funeral here, bring him home, or have it out west. So we decided he spent his vocation out west, that he'd be buried out there in the mission in BC. But I wanted to have a ceremony for him here. And so I had the nicest, kindest lady from St. Joe, from your parish, this parish, Diane Taylor.
Yes. Saw
the obituary in the paper, and she phoned me. And I knew Diane, didn't know her well, but I knew her from teaching. We both taught school at the same board. Her husband, Tom, was a good friend of Jerry's. Mm-hmm. And she said to me, Barbara, why don't you have the celebration here? Because I had announced in the paper that it would be a later date. You know, at that time, I hadn't made any plans. She was amazing. Like, she arranged, Jerry working with the native people that he loved so dearly. Like, she arranged to have one of the native parishioners do the smudging, and she also had the congregation say some native prayer that, you know, you honor the north, south, east, and west, everybody stood. So I had that special touch that I know Jerry would have wanted, you know, for his funeral, or not funeral, but memorial mass here. So that was.
And you had his cross brought back.
Well, the thing is, the story about his cross is that when we were having this service for him, I wanted something that was his, that belonged to him, and I know the cross was very important to him. They told me when he was in the hospital in Chilliwack, they'd have the cross hanging on the wall so he could see it. Yeah. And so when he died, whatever was collected, sent to the Oblates in Vancouver, this disappeared, along with his prayer book and beads and a few other things. So I had inquired from different people, you know, if anyone knows where the cross is, I really appreciate having it, but nothing. But a month after the service, a box came to the door. I opened the box, not knowing where it was from or who sent it, and lo and behold, there was his cross, his oblate cross, his beaten up prayer book, and this old pair of beads that he had. And honestly, Terry, I just felt his presence. I just felt his presence when I picked up that cross, and I know it didn't belong to the family. I know apparently the cross is handed on to a new young priest to carry on the work of his predecessor.
Yes.
So I knew that I had to bring it back. So I don't think there's too many people in line, mind you. But Larry Labocane, who was the provincial, I think, out in Vancouver, and who took care of Jerry, he said to me, Barbara, why don't you hold on to it and leave it in your will to the Oblates? So it's going to belong to St. Joseph's Church. Jerry's brought. Eventually. I'm not ready to part with it yet. All right.
You also probably experienced a lot of changes in the liturgy in the church.
Oh, yeah. I was standing on the altar here when you were showing me around, and when I was a child, the altar was, of course, way at the back, behind this dark wall. And I would see the priests and the altar boys come out and go behind. And as a little child, I used to think, I wonder what's behind there. Maybe God's behind there. Oh, it was such a mystery to me. And of course, the priests weren't facing us at that time, but the altar boys. We received communion at the communion rail. What else was different in the church? Well, even my dad, as an usher, way back, they had jackets for the ushers, which were tails, like a tail, and they wore the nice, very formal looking ushers, you know. What else was? Well, of course, there was always a sea of hats. You looked out at a full church, and all the women had to wear hats. And if you didn't have a hat, someone gave you a handkerchief and you pinned it in your hair. And so usually we'd keep a lacy one in our pocket just in case. So yeah, there was those changes. I'm trying to think. I think there was tennis courts in the schoolyard here, or the churchyard. I'm not sure.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. But. Yeah, the look of the church was a bit different, certainly, than not that much. The same stained glass windows and so on, but yeah, it was a little different. Yeah.
Yeah, it was.
yeah, exactly. But anyhow, it's still.
And you said to me, Barb, in previous conversations that you always considered St. Joe's your home parish.
Always. When time for me to get married. We actually moved to Assumption Parish. My mother and dad did, even though I came back here. And I said, I'm not married. I've been married here at St. Joseph's Parish. And of course, old Father Brennan, if you remember Father Brennan, he wasn't too happy, and his parish wasn't good enough for me, you know. And then of course, when Father Conlon said, I'm coming over to baptize your child, I thought, oh, nail in the coffin. You know? So, yeah, so it had to be St. Joseph's Church. I mean, there was just that was the only church that was important to me, you know. Yeah. I can still visualize my family, my grandmother, my sweet little Irish grandmother with her white hair, I was sitting in church and looking over and saying, she's got to be the prettiest grandmother at St. Joseph's Church, you know. Yeah, so St. Joe's was important for me and for my family as well. Yeah, for sure.
So do you have any last comments or?
Well,
anything else you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, well, I'm just thinking of how things have changed in my perspective. You know what I mentioned there about the changing of the altar and that sort of thing. And of course, when I was going here, as everyone, you know, we received our spiritual guidance and we received all our sacraments, etc., which is the same thing now, I'm assuming. But it seems to me, observing over the past few years what was happening here, even though I wasn't any part of it at all, like I really was so impressed with how inclusive the church was. You know, I can think of how the guidance and the care of the feeding the hungry and what was it, the supper table that you have here? That's still
it still exists.
Amazing. And then the work with our Indigenous brothers and sisters.
Yes.
You know, and then with the New Canadians, and also the LGBTQ community. Like I thought, this is great. I mean, Terry, I think this is Christ's message in a nutshell. Like, love your neighbor as yourself. And I think that's was happening right here at St. Joe's Church.
That's very positive.
Yeah.
All right, Barb. Well, thank you very much, Barb, for coming in and sharing us your perspective of St. Joe's and your life story here.
You're welcome.
And thank you as well for sharing so many documents and pictures with us.
Right. Well,
So,
yeah, you're welcome to have them. You know. I thought I had a lot more, but anyways,
that's good.
you're welcome to have them, Terry.
Thanks very much, Barb, for coming in.
You're welcome.